Part 1. Homelands. It is dangerous to be right in matters on which the established authorities are wrong. Voltaire. Chapter 1. Cathy. The mansion used to be filled with life. Friends from all over the lands brought exotic stuff and perspectives. The library was packed with numerous books that could never satisfy my bottomless curiosity. Finally, the farm that had held all my beloved animals, each one just as special as the last. Then my husband Mitch got black diamond disease. The so-called friends cast us off to save their own skin. The books were either sold or burnt for fuel. The mansion was scrapped for parts. And my beloved zoo, oh God, do I miss them all. Finding shelter at Mitch's father's fortress, I watched the glorious city of Ares slowly devouring itself. The people with black diamonds slowly crystallized into statues. Gangs prowled the streets for easy prey, while junkies scavenged for potions and crystals to feed their addiction. All the while, fires spread across the city, polluting the once clean air. Hell had annexed our kingdom. Looking away from our kingdom in the valley, I turned my attention back to my husband. Lying on his bed, I saw Mitch's body was covered in black hard crystals. Like diamonds, they reflected light and were impossible to destroy. The stones attached like leeches and were beyond painful to peel off. Even if one could peel it off, another one would just grow back. And like a tumor, they grow and spread across the body, paralyzing every fiber until the victim was made out of stone. Some people die an agonizing death from having crystals growing in vital areas, heart, lungs, legs, or even the brain. The best way to get rid of the disease was to catch it early on and in a non-vital area of the body. That way it can be cut off and save the host's life. Too bad the disease was transmitted through liquid, or that single glass shard that was found on Mitch's head would have been taken out a long time ago. As I took a seat next to my husband's bed, I saw him drooling and laughing like a little child, loving life as if it was all one big playground, despite him being 23 summers old. "Puddin'!" Mitch yelled with joy. "Puddin'!" "I will get you some," I said as I held his soft hand. "Please be patient." "Puddin'!" he said in a rhythmic chant. "Puddin'! Puddin'! Puddin'!" I gave him a brave smile and walked out of his chamber. It took me 10 minutes to reach the fortress kitchen. When I entered the kitchen, I noticed that I was completely alone. No servants, no cooks, no soldiers, no one. When I felt completely isolated, I started to cry. "Please, God," I whispered, "save my husband." Chapter 2. Lee. Being a mercenary, you get to see all the beautiful sights that the world has to offer, like the Arctic Sea, where you can assassinate a Union leader. In the mountains, where you can take out some mountain rebels, or my personal favorite, traveling through the dead forest, uninhabited since time began. The forest did not get its name because of being barren. No, the real reason the locals called the forest that was the fact that there was no animal life, no bird, bear, or even a butterfly. Just black spotted trees and endless fungus that produced more toxins than cyanide. Even a whiff of the air could kill a man 1,000 times over. The unlivable forest was perfect for plant growth and flying convoys. No living being dared to set foot in the dead forest. Unless you were a mercenary. It was dark and silent in the dead forest. No sound could be heard for miles on end. There were no signs of life except for the stars in the sky. If there were any incident to take place, no one would come. Perfection comes once in a blue moon. Wearing a rubber suit too hot for my own good, and a too tight gas mask, my comrade James and I were loading the bloodhound stones into the launchers. We were careful not to drop the stone into the mortar. Just one crack would cause the stone to blow up. Even though they are harder than iron, they can blow up anything in a 5-kilometer radius. No pressure. "How's your mortar doing?" I asked James. "Been ready for the last 5 minutes," James said. "I guess fucking all those whores is making you rusty." Not as rusty as your trombone, I countered. James gave me the bird. Once the bloodhound stones were in place, I looked up to see a soccer field-sized zeppelin flying overhead. On it was the royal emblem of the royal family of Apollo. "The royal family is early," James said. "Yes, they are," I said as I aimed the launcher. 20 roses that I perform regicide. You're on." We both pointed the mortar at the zeppelin. Once aimed, we pulled the trigger and let loose hell. A series of red explosions erupted across the bow of the zeppelin, and like a stone, it fell at an ungodly speed towards the forest. Once the zeppelin struck the earth, James and I picked up our .45 caliber submachine guns and rushed towards the downed zeppelin. Tonight, we earn our pay. The crash site was littered with debris and corpses. Nothing moved as the air was too poisonous to even whiff, along with the fact that the crash would kill them before the forest. Still, James and I cautiously checked the crash site to make sure there were no survivors. Traversing the debris-infested land, we saw nothing but corpses. From young to old, no one made it out of the crash. We saw everyone, including women and children, lying still and covered in their own piss and shit. By the looks of everything, there were no survivors. Approaching the downed zeppelin, we saw the same outcome on the ground. No survivors and a lot of destruction. Before I could tell James to head out, the belly of the zeppelin burst open. A spider-like machine came crawling out as if the zeppelin was an egg. In the center of the mechanical arachnid was the king. He was inside a glass bubble that was built to shelter anyone from the toxicity. Like a child, the king could not pilot the metal beast. Even with the .50 caliber machine guns, it was obvious that the king had no experience in war. He most likely came from a pampered kingdom where the royals were spoiled, where war never thickens their skin and conflict was reserved for the lower classes, basically children who knew nothing about the real world. So it came with no surprise when we fired our submachine guns, the glass shattered like a bubble. Thus, the poisonous air rushed in and killed the king. Once the king was done, we retreated back into the safety of darkness. We would have done more, but the crash did most of the work. Between the poisonous air and the building forest fire, it was best to run off. As the inferno spread across the land, it was high time that James and I got out of the area. We needed to avoid incoming patrols. Plus, we needed to figure which of us owns 20 roses. Chapter 3. Samael. Taking a life was not a hard thing to do. It was no different from stepping on a bug or cutting the throat of a human being. Every living being is destined to die. No one, not even all the gods of existence, can change this fact. Maybe that's why I became an assassin, because death was the only simple thing I understood out of this mess called life. There was no middle ground, no political correctness, nor even being fair. All that mattered was getting the job done, no matter what. It's that simple. It was a moonless night in the town of District 23 of the city-state of Zeus. Everyone was dead asleep, and the streets were more barren than an old nun's cunt. Not even the dogs were barking, showing that the night was ripe for the taking. As I walked through the streets with a hood over my head, I kept my senses receptive to my environment. I don't want to be caught with sulfur stones forced into prison. Only Ares knows who they will send to clean up the mess. So far, the streets were still deserted as I reached the target's home. I saw there were no lights coming from the windows, a sign that no one was even aware of my presence. I jumped over their fence and walked towards their drinking well. I took out the sulfur stones and dropped them into the well. I only had 5 minutes before this whole block turned into a disaster zone. Have to be quick, or I will be joining the dead. I jumped over the neighbor's fence, only to have a small dog barking at me. Great, I thought. The little bastard's going to get me killed. Without even thinking, I took hold of the dog's neck and snapped it into two. I hoped the dog would not make a sound. However, it made a brief yelping noise that caused the lights to turn on. I dashed to the next yard and returned to the street. When I got enough distance from the target area, I turned into an alley and took out my spare clothes. I quickly changed into a common's uniform and threw my other clothes into the garbage. I walked back onto the streets and continued my merry way. I did not even make 3 meters when a deafening roar erupted. The whole neighborhood came rushing out to see what the disaster was. I already knew what happened. The sulfur stone reacted to the water and set the whole aquifers aflame. Anything under the underground water source will explode and cause the whole block to collapse onto itself, killing anyone who is in the area in the process. I don't know what some guy did to piss off the royal court of Ares. However, it was none of my business. I was not paid to comprehend. I was paid to do the dirty work.